Good afternoon, everyone. At this time, we'd like to call to order the Joint Recycled Water Committee meeting for Tuesday, June 28, 2016. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Burt.
Here.
Councilmember Du Bois. Board Member Estremera. Board Member Kremen. Here. Board Chairperson Keegan. Here. Mayor Rutherford. Here. Councilmember Siegel. Here. 5 present.
Thank you. So our first agenda item is public comments for any item that's not on the agenda, and I don't have any speaker cards, so we will move on to approval of minutes from our March 29th meeting. Yes. And then, there you go. Yeah.
On page 28, there are a few references to Board Member Kremen as she and her, and I believe they're incorrect.
Well, thank you. I'm both in touch with my masculine and feminine side and supportive of the trans community, but for right now, I'm going to like them to be amended to he as we sit here today. Thank you.
Okay. That's all we got? All right. Motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passes unanimously. Okay, we can now move on to our action items, the first being an update on the Northwest County recycled and purified water efforts. Mr. Hall and Boble, I think you're doing a joint presentation.
Good afternoon, committee. Garth Hall. I head up the water supply division at the water utility. So I'm going to be leading off the presentation today. Last time we heard some of the items today. I'm going to do a fast recap on those and then move on to a lot of new information for the committee. So the presentation overview, if we have the slides, really deal with the update on what we, as you heard last time, are calling the Northwest County, the recycled and purified water efforts there. And also then we'll move on with help from Mr. Hosfeld, also on the Mountain View Recycle Water projects as well. And then finally on the next meeting items. So on the Northwest County recycled and purified water items, you remember this very complex chart, and I thought maybe because it is complex but important, if you will bear with me, I'll just walk you through a little bit of it pretty quickly. So in the middle top part of the chart, there's something there known as Part 1, and I don't think we have a pointer, but I can just use my words. The Advanced Water Purification System, that is the item that we talked about extensively last time, and we'll give you an update on that in a moment or two. That has to do with work within the plant's facility to address really a salinity issue, but has additional benefits potentially later on. Part 2 is the part that we'll talk quite extensively about today. That's over on the right part of the chart, the three boxes over on the right, where literally we have opportunities to talk about a strategic plan. So we've got really elements in that we'll get into in a little bit in some detail. Efforts around those have been underway in terms of discussion between the Water District and Palo Alto Mountain View as well. And then, all right, can I as I am now technically adapt, I can really point about these boxes over here. So these are the areas I'm talking about, which we'll dwell into in a moment. So all of these collectively we refer to generally as a strategic plan. They involve more than just planning, but we'll talk about those in a moment. Also, there's parts that have to do with a phase that will come later, and that has to do with work that really has to do with Palo Alto and others, Mountain View together, working on a phase that will come beyond those, which will talk about longer-term strategic planning efforts. Won't be talking about that much today, but at least you can see the outline of things to come. So back on the next slide, the one to do with the first item with the project we spoke of last time, we signed a cost share agreement, the district at Palo Alto did, and then Mountain View signed a separate cost sharing agreement with Palo Alto. This has to do with the purified water or desalination desalination effort within the boundaries of the water purification facility. The cost for the contract was about $325,000. The district agreed to pay 80% of that. 20% is Palo Alto, as I mentioned, shared also with Mountain View. Consultant has been selected, M&S Engineering. The notices proceed has been issued, and the work will be completed in December in 2017. So the effort around that really has to do with bringing the TDS of the recycled water down in the Palo Alto Mountain View area down from a problematic 900 milligrams per liter currently. Well, problematic in a sense that many of the users feel that they would prefer to have a lower salinity, to bring that down to a target level of 450. And the technology would be, we anticipate, would be largely similar to what we have down in the Water District's facility together with City of San Jose, the Silicon Valley Advanced Purification Center. We're anticipating that the consultant will look at something like that and recommend something of a smaller scale than that. But other alternatives are possible too, and the consultant has some free rein to find out the best solution. So the primary efforts around that have, as an indicator, underway. A kickoff meeting will be followed, has been held, but the next meeting, I believe, will happen in a month or two. Updates will happen. Phil can update me. We will have updates along the way as we proceed. So then the next item of work has to do with the strategic plan. And so in this part, the district is proposing to also make a significant contribution to the costs. We have not yet brought that to our board for approval in terms of cost share. However, the concept of doing so has been reviewed with the district's water recycle committee recently, and indication of acceptance is there. However, we need to bring that to the full board, and we'll do that at our July 26th meeting. So the parts that have to do with that are, number one, in the first part, at the top part of the chart on the right, if I get this correct. Maybe not.
Yeah, it's down at the bottom here.
Oops, where'd it go? All right, okay. The top right-hand part has to do with really preliminary work towards a design that's going to be a 10% design. You'll recall that Palo Alto preceded this work with an environmental impact report that identified an outline for recycled water facilities that would go up Page Mill Road and even beyond that into along Foothill Expressway. So even though the environmental work is done, this work would take it further into looking at the identical routes, or the possible route, the alternative routes for the pipelines, sizing, et cetera, and really develop a 10% design around those facilities. So that would be precedent towards City of Palo Alto perhaps moving forward with full design and construction elements. So this would bring us the next step, which facilitate future steps towards design. In the middle parts of the steps known as the groundwater steps, you could point for me, Phil, since you have it, the Northwest Groundwater Study Area, that together with the third, the potable reuse study, are really linked. So the idea here came about because Palo Alto has an interest in looking at groundwater as a supply beyond the emergency supply level that it currently has. In a normal year, as the committee knows, Palo Alto normally does not draw from groundwater. However, it has invested in groundwater wells for emergency supply only. Perhaps it exercises them periodically just simply to make sure that they work, but there's no significant take on the water at all. Concept was raised, well, why not at least consider groundwater as an alternative or supplement to Hetch Hetchy supply? So the study would really look at the feasibility of doing so. So there are potential ways in which groundwater could be tapped at a deeper level and brought in and utilized in Palo Alto. The district has groundwater studies that would, initially are useful to Palo Alto and Mountain View if Mountain View is interested in this area. However, the study that's needed to really delve down for Palo Alto would go to a level of detail beyond what the current studies would offer. So here the idea would be the consultant brought on board for this phase of the project would bring with it a sub-consultant that had expertise in groundwater modeling, at identifying where wells could be placed, look at the groundwater quality aspects, and start to quantify how that could be utilized by Palo Alto. Bear in mind that Palo Alto does have a very strong supply, ISG, individual service guarantee from the Hetch Hetchy. So this was not driven by any imminent sense of shortage from Palo Alto. My understanding of that, and Phil can speak to that if questions, is that really it was a question of diversity. diversity in supply and trying to find ways in which perhaps groundwater would complement and not make the city entirely dependent on Hetch Hetchy water. So the district is interested in supporting that work. And as I understand, a consultant has been identified, RFPs were issued, interviews were conducted, and so the consultant contract is, I think, is on its way to being executed, awaiting the cost share agreement I mentioned earlier. So then the issue too, I think, around the groundwater studies is trying to figure out whether in the part that is identified below that as the potable reuse study, is there a step even beyond that, where you would take the groundwater recharge capability available perhaps within city boundaries, bring to it additional water that has been purified, that could have been, in fact, emerged out of an outgrowth of the project at the wastewater control facility, channel that, and then additionally have a look at some additional recharge to amplify and utilize the groundwater that may be available in the city. So the study here would look at recharge capability. First of all, where within the city boundaries could recharge occur technically? And then having identified that, what would the cost and feasibility and water quality aspects be of bringing that water to bear in terms of recharge capability? So then the fourth element of the proposed project really has to do with looking beyond just Palo Alto and Mountain View. As you know, Palo Alto and Mountain View currently are fairly well along the way in terms of developing and utilizing recycled water. But the other cities that are in the watershed areas of the wastewater control facility have not. So that includes East Palo Alto, Los Altos Hills, and I'm no doubt I'm missing a couple, Stanford University. Those have not really developed plans for utilizing recycled water, and so the concept here would be, well, what would be the next steps if you had to take a slightly more regional approach, really bounded by the domain of the wastewater control facility? What would it look like if you could fully utilize? Bear in mind, Palo Alto does have a fairly generous amount of effluent yet to the bay. So the concept there would be, is there some additional secondary treated effluent from the wastewater facility that could be captured and then brought to bear in terms of recycled water for wider usage? So the combined efforts here are quite substantial. Phil, you could fill me in as the time frame on that and maybe add anything that I've missed, but this would go on for at least a year or two.
Right. This will take a while, and it'll feed into the update of the master plan, or strategic plan as we're calling it, kind of as a second step. All of these items feed ultimately into a strategic plan, and we can talk more about that. The only one that I'd point out that's on the chart that Garth didn't mention was Menlo Park, just to give a sense that we'll also look at possibilities from our other near neighbors that aren't participants in the Regional Water Quality Control Plan. So that's Menlo Park is the one that's listed here. Obviously a near neighbor, and maybe there's some potential there, and we'll be working with them as well.
Director Kremen.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we want to, change the name, maybe we call it Northwest County Region, because Menlo Park, East Palo Alto, while not in Santa Clara County, there's some regional benefits and resiliency, number one. So that might be something to think about, as we try to get more regional approaches. Number two, there might be another benefit. Costs might be lower. As we know, the Hetch Hetchy system is a high-price system, and with the recent challenges at Calaveras, the costs might go up. So sometimes maybe there might even be some cost benefit to water users. So we might want to think about that as a secondary benefit in the future. Thank you.
So I would just like to add on to that second point that from initial figures that I've heard from our staff, if we the operational costs of a purified water system would be apparently significantly lower, a fraction of what we currently pay for Hetch Hetchy water. And then we have to figure out what portion of the capital would come from local resources and need to be under debt service versus what portion would be able to come from other resources. So then, based on that calculation, we very possibly could see that a blended potable supply could reduce the cost of water to our ratepayers. I'd also encourage that a couple of things. We've got nomenclature that we've got to decide on a set of meanings and maybe even have a glossary. So that, for instance, on the slide that you have up here, we have phase 3 expansion, and that is recycle water or purple line, and just each place to make that distinction of which type of water we're talking about. And then with the potable reuse, Garth, you had gone through some subset of variations on this. I think we ought to break those out because those are really meaningful subsets and have them clear in terms of whether it would be direct potable blending or indirect or then some other combination. Also, I see under the fourth objective, we include Mountain View, and I think it was stated that they didn't have existing, this is recycled or purple line that's being referred to there, but they actually have the most extensive. So we want to clarify that. Their existing recycled water line is significantly more than Palo Alto's.
In the case of Mountain View?
Yes.
Thank you.
And then, and I guess the Menlo Park portion, they're not currently part of Palo Alto's wastewater treatment plant partners, whereas East Palo Alto is and has been paying members of that and partners in it for a long while. I think we certainly want to be interested in how we continue to look at various both supplies of water and users of water. But I'd want to hear more about what that Menlo Park potential intersection is, and I don't know if, Phil, you can shed some more light on that at this time?
Well, from time to time, there's interest, for example, from the Sharon Heights golf course. There's, this very large company now located over there, expanding all the time, that is interested in some kind of reuse, recycle water. And various folks in Menlo Park from time to time raise this subject. So we don't have anything definite in mind. We just know that it would be a good idea, like Gary was saying, from a regional standpoint to consider all of that, given that the distances are small. And the distances from their own sort of sewage treatment plant is great. I mean, it's on the extension of Holly, whatever they call that road out in what's almost San Carlos, but it's technically Redwood City way out there. So given that their sewage treatment plant is so far away, it seems to make sense to really seriously consider.
So that seems logical, and I don't want to attempt to resolve some of these issues today, but what's different there is within our partner agencies, such as Mountain View, each partner agency basically has a right to a share of our discharge from our wastewater treatment plant, which currently has certain values, even at the 900 TDS, but a higher value if we can bring that TDS down. And so they can choose to do what they want with it. Like Mountain View is looking at expanding the non-potable use rather than focusing on a future potable, and they want to invest in that line expansion and potential interconnect with Sunnyvale. But if we went into Menlo Park, for instance, they don't have a share. So then, presumably, they would need to acquire our wastewater as a commodity as opposed to having a right to that commodity. And that whatever amount that we would sell to them would come out of allocations of the other partners. And so that adds a complexity, and even though they might be more interested and be geographically better suited to be recipients in that portion of Menlo Park near the bay, they wouldn't necessarily be have the strongest rights to it or be receptive. On the other hand, this might be something that East Palo Alto would be interested in if a line to serve that area, if East Palo Alto looked at their allocation and determined how much of it they could take use of the non-potable, and that might not be their full allocation, they could make a decision to say, well, they could sell their portion to Facebook and finally get some value out of Facebook, or different variations, or it could pay some combination of paying for their pipe. But on the other hand, that would mean that it would use up their potential future allocation should we put in the potable recycling system. And then, of course, if we bleed off portions of the current recycled water to Mountain View, say to East Palo Alto, to up to a portion of the Stanford Research Park, then the remainder becomes a smaller supply. And so then the scale of our purified plant is reduced. And whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, we have to think about. But it just reiterates what we've seen, is that the number of different ways that the pieces to this puzzle can fit together are myriad. And it's going to be tough to figure out when and how we separate those and make certain decision points, because there's some of these are sequential, and even when we look at phase 1 expansion into South Palo Alto and Stanford Research Park, this goes back to a major question Palo Alto has: should we be investing in an expanded purple line if our future is a potable conversion of that same water? And that's a big capital question of where to put the money. Do you put them one, the other, or does it make economic sense to do both? I don't know. So I just want to make sure that as we're laying out this framework, that we put out as clearly as we can at this point in time what are all of these issues and how might they intersect with each other, with a full appreciation that this is pretty fluid.
Exactly, and that's why the chart that Garth started with tried to show us investigating all these possibilities at the same time and not sequentially, because you all and others are going to be asking us for a comparative analysis of these options, which ones are not mutually exclusive and could be done together, which ones should be thought of as options, and which ones should be thought of as different parallel actions. So we're trying to, at least at the beginning of this exercise, start in all directions at once. Thus this spider-looking chart.
Well, I'd encourage that this table maybe be broken up and have it align more with that previous chart, because this is a lot simpler.
Yeah, and the other thing I think is a good suggestion that you just made was some nomenclature. Like we've got at least 3 different sort of types of water to struggle with here. We have what we've traditionally called recycled, which is good enough for irrigation and a few other things. Then there is what we might call enhanced recycled water, which is if we blend some of our RO product back in and produce a higher quality recycled water. We probably want a nomenclature for that. And then thirdly, something that one could actually drink. And typically the industry seems to be moving toward calling that purified water. So you'll see us calling that third category purified water, but we don't really have a term yet for that sort of intermediary water where we're blending some RO with our traditional recycled, and yet that would not be potable.
Okay, I'm sorry, one sec. So that was a different definition slightly than I was assuming. I was assuming that we were using the term purified for essentially RO, microfiltration and RO, absent the final oxidation step that will be needed to make it potable. And that I thought you were using the term.
Well, maybe we need 4 then.
Or we just, we agree on the terminology and we provide that glossary so everybody continues to stay on the same page. You know, we can select whatever terms as long as everybody knows what they mean and we use them consistently.
Yeah. Well, let us work on that with the district, because you're right, there are really 4 different levels that we're.
And just if I may add, I think the district's use of the word purified matches the way you were talking about it, but I think we'll just be specific, so we together use the same term for the same meaning.
Great. Director Kremen? Councilmember Siegel.
Thank you. Just to make things more complicated, I can think of a number of other categories. We have an office development in Mountain View that's going to be collecting stormwater and somehow treating that and combining it with gray water. So I hope, and I've been promoting the reuse of water from Superfund treatment. So I think we need a longer list because of the drought, people are coming up with all kinds of ideas of ways to reuse water. Most of them are good, and we just need to know which is which and how they interplay.
Right, and we tried to deal with all those other supply opportunities on our little chart in the left-hand side in the middle. The satellite, on-treatment, reuse, stormwater use. So we were working on, and John Mukar has a draft of it, a kind of summary of what's available there, and we know we need to integrate that into the central strategy plan when we're putting everything together. So that's a good point, Councilman.
Director Kremen.
Yeah, you know, building on those comments, one thing we do want to take into consideration is the effect of climate change on our water supply, and even in the Hetch Hetchy system, there's some concern on what could happen if you believe some of the models. So anyone dependent on imported water, the benefits of having regional self-sufficiency and kind of more control of our destiny, whether it be the vagaries of San Francisco PUC, there's some other, well, you might say those are intangible benefits. I think there's many who would believe that there's some value to those. So maybe we could have that as part of our analysis.
Yeah, I would put them as future benefits. They're pretty significant. I agree. Yes, Mr. Hall.
Mr. Chair, I just want to also assure Member Siegel that we will not forget to mention the other things that are happening a lot in Mountain View. Maybe Mr. Hosfeld may have that in his discussion, that a lot of the tech companies are starting to look at on-site reuse. And that is a part of reuse, and it has stormwater capture, it has gray water usage, and various elements like that. And so, to the extent that those are tangible, real things that we can identify, those will be included in the plan.
Thank you. So does that cover item 4.1?
Yes, it does.
All right, onward to the Mountain View recycled water projects.
Good afternoon.
Mr.
I'm Greg
Hosfeld.
Yes, Greg Hosfeld, Assistant Public Works Director, City of Mountain View. Just going to run down what's kind of pending on the table at the moment, and then step back a little bit and let you know kind of what our thought process is. You can see on our overhead Oops, sorry. One more, two more. There we go. So we actually have several projects that we're looking at the moment. The potential intertie with the city of Sunnyvale, that would be accomplished more over a long term. I think we have a new development going in, a Google development over on East Middlefield Road, and they've expressed a desire to use recycled water at that site. Probably when they get fully up and running, 75,000 gallons a day of recycled water. We do not have any part of our infrastructure near that site, so we would be tapping into Sunnyvale site. We're currently working on the site plans with Google before we go too far with the city of Sunnyvale, and they are certainly aware of our interest, and you can add comments as they wish, but we don't see any huge obstacles to that. So it would be running just a small recycled line across the city limits. Mountain View would more than likely be the water retailer, Sunnyvale the wholesaler, and again, that would at least start that intertie process. What would need to happen would be a further expansion of our system to the south of 101. So I'm going to go kind of geographically. We are still working on our expansion to the NASA Moffett Field area. That will be a fairly significant development over there to be developed over the next several years. The actual infrastructure to supply recycled water should be complete by the end of 2017, and we're working with the project representatives to go ahead and get water technically under Stevens Creek, supply water under Stevens Creek in the new development. Ultimately, there should be 250 to 300,000 gallons a day of recycled water. Once that is done, we will have the option to expand south of Highway 101, which would be a fairly significant cost for a project, probably 35 to 40,000 feet of pipeline, which would supply the Middlefield Ellis Wismont area. Just because of some of the pressure issues and system design, it would require a booster station as well as a fairly sizable reservoir. Again, fairly expensive, $25 million, probably 150 to 200,000 gallons per day of recycled water use. We are also looking at a small expansion in the existing service area to bring recycled water to Charleston Road and Shorebird Way, which would give us another half a dozen customers, probably another 100,000 gallons a day. That is tentatively scheduled for fiscal year 2017-2018. That'll be a fairly low cost, maybe $1 million, $1.5 million project, fairly easy, but it would just, again, extend the service within the North Bay Shore area. As we look at all the potential for all these projects, some of these are fairly expensive from a construction standpoint. I think in a global sense, not a huge amount of additional recycled water use. We're currently at about 400,000 gallons a day. And again, we're looking at increments of 1 to 200,000 gallons. We are going to work on a strategy that looks at all these projects kind of in a greater plan. And I think we will not have specific recommendations about how to move forward until probably late 2016, early 2017. I've heard the concern that we are going exclusively towards recycled water. And I do want to clarify that we are absolutely looking at the options that are being presented and developed for alternative uses, indirect, direct potable use, the purification uses. And certainly as some of those things become more clear, we will take a step back and look at everything from a standpoint of consumption, cost, time to develop, and where the water would go. We're absolutely supportive and participating in the effort to study the feasibility of the advanced treatment over at Palo Alto, and we like that one a lot. We think that would solve a lot of our salinity issues as well as allow us to expand use within the North Bay Shore and at our golf course. Right now, our golf course is our largest user, but for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it does sit on a landfill with a clay cap, so the salts from the water tend to stay right there under the grass. So we do blend water at that site. But again, our main focus right now is just kind of waiting for some of these options to develop a little further, and late this year, early next year, see what everything looks like on paper. So we're not necessarily wedded to a long-term expansion of recycled water any more than any other option. I think there's some other opportunities coming up, and as Mayor Burt alluded to, they're developing very quickly. So we're definitely in a watch mode. We will still be pursuing the effort to go ahead and extend our recycled water supply agreement with Palo Alto to make sure that we continue to serve the customers we have. But again, it's really early for us to develop a full strategy. The only other thing I'd like to add to that is I think the last time we talked about rates, just in a very generic sense, Mountain View's fiscal year 16-17 recycled water rate will be $2.98 per unit versus our commercial rate of $6.35. So we're just a little under half the cost of potable water for the recycled. And I want to clarify and update that.
Can you say what that translates to in acre feet? That's
I could in a minute. I could calc that out for you. But again, $2.98 a unit versus $6.35. And what we're seeing is, as all the other agencies are, some significant increases in the cost of potable water. So our water rates are going up about 10%. Our recycled rate is going up at about 3%, just more of a cost of living factor.
great, thank you. And just from your kind of pricing model, you have your recycled water at 40% of your potable rate or so. Have you thought about kind of different models? You as a city are the same geographic entity for your wastewater as for your water supply. And have you thought about whether the recycled water should be sold at whatever the market rate is for that, and then whatever additional income above cost goes to reducing what you charge for potable water for your entire customer base? Has there been discussions around that?
At this point, we're focused on cost recovery for the recycled system, so that may be a longer term issue as we start working on improving the quality, but at this point it's cost recovery only.
Do you have more demand for your recycled water than you have supply, or where does that balance out now?
No, at this point, with use of about 400,000 gallons a day, we do have the 3 million gallons a day available. So we've got plenty of supply at this point. Again, the salinity is an issue for us, partially because salinity and partially because of just the makeup of the North Bayshore area, again with the golf course. And then a lot of the rest of the North Bayshore area has pretty high groundwater, which is fairly saline. So there's been those ongoing challenges.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Greg, did you want to say anything about the map, just to maybe summarize some of those things you were talking about using or no?
Well, let me see if I have a pointer or a mouse. Let's see if I can see this really in the light here. So,
Well,
okay. So in this area, you can see our existing system. The system that's going in over at the NASA Moffett area is running along through here. Like I said, that is in construction at this point. Any expansion within the area south of Highway 101, this is tentatively what it looks like. There's some fairly significant business parks down here. And if you look really carefully, right there, that would supply the City of Mountain View Municipal Operations Center. We did want to throw that on there since we're close by and would be able to do some truck fills and some other things and supply some of our parks operations through that site. Again, over the longer term, moving towards I guess that'd be the southeast, towards City of Sunnyvale, and the Google facility being probably right along here. So that's our potential intertie as it stands now. Again, very flexible plans for the time being, so we'll see exactly where things go.
Board Member Keegan, did you have something?
Yes, I did. So I'm assuming, as you were discussing in your presentation, that you're going to be looking really at the cost effectiveness of the expansion of your system, because when I look at the map, it does look to me like it's going to be pretty expensive. I mean, you're constructing projects in heavily urbanized areas, and so I'd be interested to see, as my colleague alluded to, the cost per acre foot compared to other options, because I think it's going to be, fairly significant. And
for the recycle, we agree, especially, so the capital costs are very high, consumption not as high as we'd like. What we're finding is a lot of the businesses in that area, there'd be fairly limited use through toilet flushing, those type of things, possibly cooling towers, and landscaping, relatively minimal in that area because it's mostly buildings and the green footprint's pretty small. The estimates I've got here are somewhat based on current water quality, however, and I think we would see those numbers increase as we start getting the advanced treatment in place. Even so, though, I think the cost will be fairly high.
Yeah, I would agree.
So it'll definitely be a comparison, considering the current recycled water system, a sunk cost in large part.
Oh, and colleagues, feel free to use toggle switches, and that way I'll make sure I don't miss anybody who wants to speak. I have one other question. In the expanded areas, are any of these uses for toilet use on new development, at new development sites?
We're certainly encouraging the dual plumbing. We do not have a requirement for that at this point, but for the businesses that are going in there, we're having those discussions.
And Councilmember Siegel, is the council considering any future regulations on dual plumbing going forward?
Because so many of our projects are being done under like new precise plans where we've got legislative authority, we seem to be addressing these as they come before us. And basically the companies are falling all over, the office developers are falling all over themselves to outgreen each other. So given the time that it takes to develop an ordinance and the changing technologies out there, my impression is we're going to be doing it, one by one. I remember meeting with Microsoft and they said, well, of course we're going to be LEED Platinum, but here are 2 other standards that we're planning to meet that you've never heard of. And so maybe things will change when the economy changes, but right now the companies are taking the lead. Perhaps for multifamily residential, we might need a little more intervention, but even that will be governed by, most of that will be governed by a precise plan for North Bay Shore.
And of course, the dual plumbing has the same dilemma as we have on a larger infrastructure scale on a separate piping system. And so if a company puts in dual plumbing and then subsequently a city elects to switch over to purified water, then that second line doesn't work unless it made sense to actually put in both lines permanently, that you would split your recycled water and have one that is lower cost to produce, and that's a number we haven't seen yet.
So the discussions we've had, particularly around landscaping from our Public Works Director, when we ask about this, is landscaping has a separate pipe to go to the plants on the property, and we can hook up whatever input we want and switch that at any time. So for some of these things, it's less of a problem than you might think. For multifamily residential, where people have individual water bills, you might have a more complicated system.
Yep. Great. So does that conclude item 4.2? Yes. Okay. Oh.
One last benefit. I mean, of course, it's city's individual preference which way to go, whether it be the purple pipe or potable or a combination is. It's not just the cost of kind of the ripping up the streets to put in the new the recycled non-potable. It's the traffic and the overhead in areas that have had impact already. While it's not a financial cost, it's sometimes challenging for people that, the economic boom is kind of maybe a little less construction for some of them. Might have some benefits.
Okay, we then just have our final item, I believe. Yeah, Board Member Keegan.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on Director Kremen's comment, which is those of us in the public works business know that the public right-of-way has limited capacity, and so to the extent that we're putting in something that might be duplicative, there's actually, we're ever crowding that limited real estate space, and we're having less opportunity for flexibility for upgrades and new utilities and things like that in the future. So I think it's important to be conscious of that as well as we move forward.
We've been having discussions with Google Fiber about that.
Great. Okay, our final item is, well, not quite final item, but next meetings. We have a tentative agenda, I believe. On slide 12. And our next scheduled meeting is for September 27th. So I guess that, and is that once again at 1 p.m.? Is that the plan? Stay at this hour?
Correct. 1 to 3.
Yeah. Card saying, yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Are there any alternative sites within Palo Alto? I find this difficult to get to, as well as difficulty with parking. So I know that there's a Palo Alto facility like off of San Antonio Road, I believe, and some other locations. So just a thought, but it took me quite a while to find parking today.
Let me apologize for that. It's normally not this bad. I don't know what was happening today, if there's a soccer game here or something. But yeah, we can, in fact, you might enjoy seeing our new Mitchell Park Library and Community Center, where we've got a number of, it's a platinum building, and there's a number of water use and water savings and stormwater features. We could show you that. And parking is easier, and it is right off San Antonio Road. So yeah, we can do that. Oops, it's not available. No.
And I just want to share something that is not recycle water, but an action that the council took last night, which was to receive the report from our stormwater advisory committee and our staff report on our future stormwater initiatives. And they really represent a large transformation in our approach. We had one of our neighborhoods, the Southgate neighborhood, in the last stormwater initiative that had basically a series of localized percolation approaches as opposed to a piping system, and they were limited on the ability to put in a piping system. It drove us to look at alternatives, and we now have our next plan for the next decade or so is going to be essentially the default will be toward green stormwater management initiatives, and that not only has improves the percolation, but it also reduces the storm runoff that in our case is a very great competition between stormwater piping and our riverine flooding. And so basically these programs give us better flood protection as well. So I just want to share that. It's a pretty strong transformation. Yeah, Board Member Kremen.
Yes, thank you. You know, the Water District definitely would be willing to host, or maybe the City of Mountain View, to show that we're all equal partners in this. Maybe we could rotate a little bit.
Great. Okay. So we can, in the meantime, figure out on meeting locations. And I see there's an item on clerk review and clarification of committee requests and recommendations. What does that mean?
Before we move off 4.3, if I may,
Sure.
Mr. Chair. So there is an item on slide 4.3, if it's still on. It says potential meetings to consider recycled water interties with neighboring cities. So Mr. Hosfeld in an earlier item talked about the idea that they're looking at an intertie with the city of Sunnyvale. Staff has actually looked at that concept not only in the scale that Mr. Hosfeld talked about, but at a slightly larger scale with bidirectional flows. You know, the Water District has recently initiated a process of developing a county-wide recycle master plan. And the process is in its infancy. Initial meetings have been held, input have been received from the cities here represented and others. But one of the ideas would be is there some optimization that should be looked at from a countywide point of view? And I don't want to exclude some of the concepts that came out with Menlo Park either, although the district has some issues around that. But in just within the county itself, there are discussions that we have had from time to time about connecting through to optimize use of recycled water across these entities. And so the question would be is whether this committee is interested in having further discussions, having staff bring forward some information that would be of potential interest for the committee's discussion around that. And that might include, we have Mr. Stuffelpine here representing Sunnyvale. That might, for example, represent input from City of Sunnyvale as well. And it's a question before the committee related to the next agenda.
Okay, so would the committee like to include that information in the next meeting? All right, sounds good.
All right.
In fact, we were going to suggest that for our next meeting, to facilitate that discussion of interties and regionalization of systems, to have it be a joint committee meeting with the Sunnyvale equivalent. The district has also set up a meeting like this, or a committee like this with Sunnyvale. And so we were going to suggest that for the next meeting, not only as a topic, as Garth just described, but to have a joint meeting and see how that goes. Ultimately, we may, the district may decide to collapse several of these together when we sort of get our feet wet and we know what the individual groups are doing. But for the moment, we're just suggesting, hey, how about a experimental joint meeting for the September meeting and see how that goes and pull Sunnyvale. And of course, the district is here anyway.
How large is the Sunnyvale group?
2 people.
Two councilors from Sunnyvale. Right.
And anybody else?
The water.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are the water district representatives the same? Yeah, so that's good. So,
Makes it easier. Okay.
yeah, so 2 additional people.
Great. Okay. Sounds good. Yeah, Board Member Kremen.
Are we on the wrap up right now?
Well, we have a clerk review. Yeah, I don't know what that means.
I guess it'd be like, recap of the stuff we talked about. It'd be good just to be sure that the people in Los Altos, Hills, Stanford know about this, if that wouldn't be a bad thing, number one. Just to be sure, for sake of completeness, just invite them. Number 2, maybe some thinking about retitling to incorporate the regional nature, especially East Palo Alto, and maybe Menlo Park, just maybe a regional approach, as we try to solve regional problems. And 3, continued outreach to the Sharon Heights people, because I think we could, while they might not be entitled to have an entitlement on the water, maybe they can write a check, which would be good for all of us.
And we do invite those folks, and we'll continue to invite them. And I think they'll come from time to time when it's convenient. It may pique their interest that we're doing this jointly with Sunnyvale next time. We'll offer that as sort of a new angle and see if that whets their appetite. We would like to get them here. We'll try again. Yeah.
Okay. If that's everything, we'll adjourn. Thank you.